The hospital's fluorescent lights cast a sickly pale glow over the waiting room where Sophie Chen sat, her hands trembling as she clutched a crumpled tissue. 72 hours. That's how long her younger sister Maya had been in the ICU, fighting for her life after a car accident that had left her with traumatic brain injuries requiring immediate surgery. Surgery that cost $350,000. Surgery their insurance had denied. Sophie was 26 years old, a freelance graphic designer whose most extravagant purchase in the last year had been a $4 latte. She lived in a cramped studio apartment in the city's cheapest neighborhood, ate ramen 3 nights a week, and sent half her modest income to help her widowed mother and sister back home. She had $2,847 in her bank account. She had called every relative, every friend, every charity foundation she could find. The answer was always the same gentle, pitying rejection. Miss Chen, the hospital's financial coordinator, a tired woman named Mrs. Patel, approached with a clipboard. "I'm sorry, but we need a deposit of at least $100,000 by tomorrow morning, or we'll have to transfer your sister to a county facility." The words hit Sophie like a physical blow. County facility. A death sentence wrapped in bureaucratic language. She had researched them. Overcrowded, understaffed, with mortality rates that made her stomach churn. "Please," Sophie whispered, her voice breaking. "There has to be another way. I'll work. I'll do anything. I'll sign over my future earnings, my—" "I wish I could help," Mrs. Patel said, her eyes genuinely sad. "But I don't make the rules." Sophie walked out of the hospital into the cold November rain, her vision blurred by tears she refused to shed in public. She had always been the strong one, the one who held the family together after her father's death 5 years ago. She couldn't break now. She wouldn't. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. Normally, she would have ignored it, but desperation made people do illogical things. "Hello," her voice was hoarse. "Sophie Chen." The voice was male, smooth, professional, with an accent she couldn't quite place. British, Australian. "Who is this?" "My name is Marcus Webb. I'm calling with a proposition that may solve your current financial crisis." Sophie froze on the rain-soaked sidewalk, pedestrians flowing around her like water around a stone. Scam. This had to be a scam. But how did he know about her crisis? "I'm not interested in whatever." "Your sister Maya needs $350,000 for emergency surgery," Marcus interrupted calmly. "Your mother has stage 2 diabetes and can't afford her medications. You're 3 months behind on rent, and your landlord is preparing eviction paperwork. You have $2,847 in your account and $63,000 in student loan debt." The air left Sophie's lungs. "How do you know all that?" "Because someone with considerable resources has been watching you, Miss Chen, and that someone has a proposal." "This is insane. I'm hanging up." "The person I represent will pay all of your sister's medical expenses, settle your debts, provide your mother with lifetime medical care, and establish a trust fund for Maya's future rehabilitation," Marcus said, his voice never rising above that calm, professional tone. "In exchange, you will do one thing." Sophie's heart hammered against her ribs. One thing, there was always a catch. What thing? "Marry him." The word landed like a bomb. Sophie let out a sharp, hysterical laugh. "You're insane. This is insane. I'm hanging up." "He's not asking for love, Miss Chen. He's not asking for physical intimacy. He's asking for 1 year of your life, 12 months in a marriage of convenience. You'll live in his home, accompany him to necessary social functions, and play the role of his wife in public. That's all." "That's all," Sophie's voice rose despite her efforts to control it. "That's trafficking, that's—" "It's a contract," Marcus corrected smoothly. "A legal, binding agreement with very specific terms that protect both parties. You'll have your own legal representation, your own quarters, complete financial independence, and an exit clause. After 1 year, you receive a divorce settlement of $5 million, or you can walk away right now and watch your sister die." The words hung in the cold air, brutal and undeniable. "Why?" Sophie whispered. "Why me? Why would anyone do this?" "Those answers aren't mine to give," Marcus replied. But I can tell you that the man I represent is not a predator. He's not looking to hurt you. He has his reasons, and they're complicated, but they're not sinister. You have 24 hours to decide. If you agree, a car will pick you up tomorrow at noon outside your apartment building. I haven't even met him, Sophie protested weakly. You will after you sign the initial confidentiality agreement. Marcus paused. I know this sounds impossible, Sophie, but your sister doesn't have 24 hours to wait for a miracle. This is the miracle. The line went dead. Sophie stood in the rain, her mind a whirlwind of terror and desperate hope. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life. But then again, sisters didn't usually fight for their lives while you stood helpless either. She thought of Maya, just 19 years old, with dreams of becoming a veterinarian. Maya, who had never hurt anyone, who volunteered at animal shelters and made their mother laugh with terrible jokes. Maya, who was dying while Sophie stood in the rain, afraid to grab a lifeline because it came from a stranger's hand. She pulled out her phone and typed a single message to the number Marcus had called from. I need to know more, tomorrow at noon. The response came within seconds. The car will be there, bring nothing, everything you need will be provided. The black Mercedes arrived at precisely 11:59 a.m. Sophie had spent the previous night in a sleepless haze, alternating between absolute certainty that this was her only option and absolute terror that she was walking into a trap. She had told her best friend Jenna everything in a sealed email, set to send automatically if Sophie didn't check in by 6 p.m. The driver was a silent, professional man in his 50s who opened the door without a word. The car's interior was immaculate, all soft leather and tinted windows. Sophie sank into the seat, her cheap coat and worn jeans feeling painfully out of place against such luxury. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving the city behind and entering a part of the countryside Sophie had only seen in magazine spreads about how the other half lives. Estates with names instead of addresses. Driveways that were longer than her entire neighborhood block. The car turned through a set of massive iron gates that opened automatically, following a tree-lined drive that seemed to stretch into infinity. When the house finally came into view, Sophie's breath caught. It wasn't a house. It was a manor, all stone and glass and architectural impossibility, sitting on what had to be 50 acres of manicured grounds. A fountain in the circular driveway looked like it belonged in front of a European palace. Miss Chen, Marcus Webb was waiting at the entrance. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with sharp features and eyes that evaluated her with the efficiency of a doctor examining an X-ray. Thank you for coming. Mr. Sterling is waiting in his study. Sterling, she finally had a last name. Marcus led her through hallways that felt more like museum corridors, past artwork that Sophie's designer's eye recognized as genuine pieces worth more than her entire life's earnings. Every detail spoke of wealth so profound it became abstract, meaningless in its enormity. The study was lined floor to ceiling with books, a massive mahogany desk dominating one end. Behind it, silhouetted against a wall of windows overlooking gardens that stretched to the horizon, stood a man. He turned as they entered, and Sophie's prepared speech died in her throat. He was young, early 30s at most, tall, with dark hair and features that were striking in a way that had nothing to do with conventional handsomeness and everything to do with the intensity of his presence. He wore casual clothes, dark jeans, a gray sweater, but somehow they looked more elegant than any suit she'd ever seen. But it was his eyes that stopped her, gray, storm cloud gray, and filled with something she couldn't name. Assessment, wariness, pain. Miss Chen, he said. His voice was different from Marcus's, deeper, with an American accent softened by years spent elsewhere. Thank you for coming. I'm Ethan Sterling. You're the one who wants to marry a stranger. The words came out more challenging than Sophie intended, but she was too exhausted and frightened to play games. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'm the one who needs to marry a stranger, yes, there's a difference. I don't understand any of this, Sophie said, her hands clenched at her sides. I don't understand why you're offering to save my sister's life in exchange for a fake marriage. I don't understand how you even know about my situation. And I don't understand why you think I would ever agree to this insanity. But you're here, Ethan observed quietly, which means you're considering it. My sister is dying. The words came out raw, sharp. I would consider selling my soul to the devil himself if it meant saving her. That doesn't mean I trust you. Good, Ethan said, surprising her. You shouldn't trust me. You shouldn't trust anyone who offers what seems like a miracle. But I'm going to ask you to anyway because I have no other choice and neither do you. He walked to his desk and pulled out a thick folder. This is the contract. Every term, every condition, every protection you'll have. Marcus will ensure you have your own lawyer review it. Nothing in this document puts you in physical danger or requires anything beyond what I stated on the phone. You weren't on the phone, Sophie said. I was listening, Ethan admitted. I needed to hear your voice. I needed to know if you were someone who could do this. Do what? Play pretend wife to a billionaire. Save both of us, he said simply. The words hung in the air, strange and resonant. Sophie took the folder with trembling hands. You still haven't told me why. Ethan walked to the window, his back to her, his shoulders tense. When he spoke, his voice was different, stripped of its confident veneer. My grandfather built Sterling Industries from nothing. He was ruthless, brilliant, and completely convinced that wealth corrupts character. When he died, he left everything, his entire fortune, $3.8 billion, in a trust with one condition. He turned back to face her. I inherit everything on my 33rd birthday, which is in exactly 1 year, but only if I'm married, and only if my wife meets certain criteria. What criteria? That she's not from my world, Ethan said. That she has no connection to my family's business or social circle. That she's someone who's proven herself capable of integrity, hard work, and loyalty to family above personal gain. He looked at her directly. You're a designer who works 60-hour weeks to support your family. You've never taken advantage of others. You've rejected 3 job offers from competitors because you value loyalty. You visit your mother every month despite the travel cost. You're exactly what his twisted test was designed to find. A test, Sophie felt cold. Your grandfather wanted you to marry someone poor to prove I'm not a gold digger. He wanted me to marry someone real, Ethan corrected. Someone who couldn't be bought, someone whose character had been tested by actual hardship, not the manufactured challenges of the privileged. He laughed, a bitter sound. The irony is that I'm buying you anyway, just with a different currency. My sister's life, Sophie whispered. Yes, Ethan said simply. I'm not going to pretend this is noble. I'm not going to pretend I'm some knight in shining armor. I'm a desperate man with a fortune I can't access and a family legacy I don't want to lose. And you're a desperate woman with a dying sister and no other options. We're both trapped, Sophie. I'm just offering us a way to survive our respective cages. The brutal honesty was almost worse than a lie would have been. Sophie sank into a chair, the folder heavy in her lap. What happens after the year? You get your divorce settlement. I get my inheritance. We part ways and never speak again. Ethan's voice was flat, final. I'll set up the medical trust for your sister and mother regardless of whether you stay the full year. That's non-negotiable. If you want to leave after 6 months, you can. You'll still get $2 million instead of 5. Why would you do that? Because I'm not a monster, Ethan said quietly. I'm just a man in an impossible situation trying not to drown. Sophie looked down at the contract, her vision blurring. I need to see my sister first, before I decide. The hospital called 10 minutes ago, Marcus spoke up from the doorway, making Sophie jump. She'd forgotten he was there. Your sister's condition is deteriorating. They need to operate within the next 12 hours. The world tilted. 12 hours, not 24, not even a day to think, to plan, to make sense of the insanity. If you agree, Ethan said, I'll have the money wired to the hospital in the next hour. Your sister will have the surgery today. You'll have a car to take you there, to stay with her as long as you need. We can sign the marriage license tomorrow. Tomorrow? She would be married tomorrow to a man she'd met 20 minutes ago. I'll have my own room. Sophie's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Your own wing of the house, Ethan confirmed. Complete privacy, I won't enter without permission. And the social functions. Maybe a dozen events over the year. Charity galas, business dinners, nothing that requires more than a few hours of your time. He paused. I know this is insane. I know I'm asking the impossible, but I'm asking anyway. Sophie thought of Maya, so young and full of dreams. She thought of her mother who had sacrificed everything after her father's death. She thought of the clinic that had rejected her pleas, the bills that had piled up, the crushing weight of helplessness. And she thought of this stranger, this impossibly wealthy man who spoke of being trapped despite his billions, who offered salvation with one hand and demanded a year of her life with the other. I want it in writing, Sophie said, her voice stronger than she felt. That my sister's care continues regardless of whether I stay the full year, that my mother's medical expenses are covered for life, and I want a therapist available if I need one. This is going to mess with my head, and I want professional help paid for. Ethan nodded, something like respect flickering in his storm-gray eyes. Done anything else? I want to know the real reason, Sophie said. Not the inheritance. The real reason you're doing this instead of just marrying someone from your world and pretending to meet your grandfather's requirements. Ethan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because everyone I've ever known has wanted something from me. My money, my name, my connections. I've been engaged 3 times, and every single one of them sold stories to tabloids the second we ended. I don't trust anyone in my world anymore. He looked at her directly. At least with you, I know exactly what you want. At least with you, the transaction is honest. It was the saddest thing Sophie had ever heard. Okay, she whispered, I'll do it. The marriage took place in a judge's private office with only Marcus and a lawyer named Sarah Chen, no relation, as witnesses. Sophie wore the same jeans and sweater she'd arrived in. Ethan wore a suit that probably cost more than her annual rent. The ceremony lasted 7 minutes. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the judge intoned, her voice professionally neutral in the face of what was clearly a business transaction. There was no kiss. Ethan simply shook her hand, a gesture so formal and cold it made Sophie want to laugh hysterically. Instead, she signed her name 17 times on various documents and became Mrs. Sophie Sterling. The identity felt like wearing someone else's skin. True to his word, Ethan had wired the money the previous afternoon. Maya's surgery had happened at 11 p.m., 8 hours of delicate brain work that left their mother sobbing in relief in Sophie's arms. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Maya would live. She would recover. Sophie had saved her sister by selling a year of her life to a stranger. The car will take you back to the hospital, Ethan said as they left the courthouse. Take as long as you need with your family. When you're ready, Marcus will bring you to the house. When I'm ready, Sophie laughed shakily. I'm not sure I'll ever be ready. Then take your time being not ready, Ethan said with that ghost of a smile. We have a year, no need to rush into the nightmare. He left in a different car, and Sophie was alone with Marcus and the crushing reality of what she'd just done. She spent 3 days at the hospital. Maya woke up on day 2, groggy and confused but alive, wonderfully, miraculously alive. Her mother cried and held Sophie's hand and whispered, How did you do this, baby? How did you find the money? Sophie had prepared the lie carefully. A grant, she said. A special medical grant for emergency cases. Her mother was too grateful and exhausted to question it deeply. When Jenna called, Sophie told a different lie. A loan, she said, from a family friend of her father's. She'd pay it back over time. The lies tasted like ash, but the truth was impossible. Hi, Mom. Hi, best friend. I married a billionaire stranger in a business transaction to save Maya's life was not a conversation she was ready to have. On the 4th day, Marcus came to collect her. Mrs. Sterling, he said, and Sophie flinched at the name. Mr. Sterling asked me to remind you that you can stay as long as you need. My sister's stable, Sophie said tiredly. My mother has help from the nurses. I'm just in the way now. That wasn't quite true, but she needed to face her new reality eventually. The manor looked different in daylight. less imposing, almost beautiful in the afternoon sun. Marcus led her not to the main entrance but around to a side wing, through gardens that smelled of late-blooming roses. "Your wing," Marcus explained, opening a door. "Mr. Sterling's quarters are in the east section. You have complete privacy here." The rooms were stunning. A bedroom with a four-poster bed that could have fit her entire old apartment. A bathroom with a soaking tub and rain shower. A sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A walk-in closet already filled with clothes in exactly her size. "How did he know my measurements?" Sophie asked, touching a cashmere sweater with careful fingers. "Mr. Sterling is very thorough," Marcus said neutrally. "Dinner is at 7 in the main dining room. You're welcome to eat in your rooms if you prefer. The house staff has been briefed on your privacy requirements." He left, and Sophie was alone in rooms that cost more to furnish than most people earned in a lifetime. She sank onto the bed and finally let herself cry. The first week was surreal. Sophie saw Ethan exactly 3 times, all of them brief, polite encounters in hallways. He would nod, she would nod, and they would continue in opposite directions like strangers sharing an elevator. She spent her days working on freelance projects in her sitting room, trying to pretend everything was normal. The house staff, a cook named Mrs. Rodriguez, a housekeeper named Anne, and several others whose names Sophie was still learning, were unfailingly polite and completely discreet. On day 8, Ethan knocked on her door. Sophie had been working on a logo design in yoga pants and an oversized sweater, her hair in a messy bun. She looked like herself for the first time since arriving, and somehow that made his presence more jarring. "Sorry to interrupt," Ethan said. He was in casual clothes again, jeans and a dark Henley. "Do you have a moment?" "It's your house," Sophie said, then winced. "Sorry, that came out wrong." "It's your house too now," Ethan replied. "For the next year at least, may I come in?" Sophie nodded, suddenly self-conscious about the blanket fort she'd accidentally created on the sofa, her laptop and coffee cups scattered around. Ethan's eyes swept the room and something flickered in his expression. "You're working." "I still have clients," Sophie said defensively. "I still have a career. The contract said I could maintain my professional life." "I wasn't criticizing," Ethan said quickly. I'm glad that you're not just waiting around for the year to end." He held out a folder. "We have our first public appearance next week, a charity gala for children's hospitals. It's unavoidable. I'm on the board." Sophie took the folder, flipping through invitations and event details. "What do I need to do?" "Attend, smile. Let me introduce you as my wife. We'll need a story for how we met." "What's the story?" Ethan hesitated. "I thought we'd say you were consulting on a design project for one of my companies, that we met professionally and it developed from there. It's close enough to the truth that you won't have to remember elaborate lies." It was surprisingly thoughtful. Sophie nodded slowly. "Okay, what should I wear?" "Whatever you want," Ethan said. "There's a personal shopper who can help if you'd like, or you can wear something from the closet, whatever makes you comfortable." "Nothing about this makes me comfortable," Sophie said honestly. Ethan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "I know, I'm sorry." "You're not, though," Sophie said. "You're desperate, there's a difference." "You're right," Ethan agreed. "I'm not sorry for offering you this deal. I'm sorry that circumstances put us both in a position where this was the best option either of us had." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Sophie, thank you for going through with this. I know it costs you more than money can measure." He left before she could respond. Sophie looked down at the gala invitation, at the elegant script announcing an evening of philanthropic celebration. Her first performance as Mrs. Ethan Sterling. She had a week to prepare to lie to hundreds of people. A week to learn how to pretend to be in love with a man she barely knew. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a strange numbness, as if she were watching her life happen to someone else. The night of the gala, Sophie stood in front of her mirror and barely recognized herself. The personal shopper, a chic woman named Dominique, had outfitted her in a midnight blue gown that somehow made her look elegant and effortless. Professional makeup artists had transformed her face without making her look painted. Her hair was swept up in a style that probably had a French name she couldn't pronounce. She looked like someone who belonged at a billionaire's side. She felt like a fraud. A knock at her door made her heart jump. "Come in," she called, expecting Marcus. It was Ethan. He stopped in the doorway, his eyes widening slightly. He was in a tuxedo, and Sophie had to admit he wore it like armor, elegant, powerful, perfectly tailored. But it was his reaction to her that made her breath catch. "You look," he trailed off, something unreadable crossing his face. "Incredible." "Dominique did all the work," Sophie said, hating how nervous she sounded. "Dominique didn't change who you are," Ethan said quietly. "She just enhanced it." He cleared his throat, the moment of vulnerability passing. "Ready?" "No," Sophie admitted, "but I don't think that matters." The limo ride was silent. Sophie watched the city lights blur past, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Ethan sat across from her, his expression unreadable in the dim interior light. "They're going to have questions," he said finally. "About us, about how we met. The story is that you consulted on a design project 8 months ago. We kept it quiet because I value my privacy. We got married last week in a small private ceremony because we didn't want media attention." 8 months, Sophie repeated. "We've supposedly been together for 8 months, and I don't know your favorite color." "Gray," Ethan said immediately. "Like storm clouds, yours is teal. You have a teal pencil case on your desk that's covered in stickers. Your favorite food is Thai. I've seen the takeout containers. You drink coffee like it's a life support system, and you hate mornings. You work late because you lose track of time when you're designing. Am I wrong?" Sophie stared at him. "You've been watching me." "I live in the same house," Ethan said. "I notice things. That's not sinister, Sophie. That's just paying attention." "Why?" "Because you're my wife," he said simply. "Even if it's fake, even if it's temporary, I'm not going to treat you like you're invisible." The limo stopped in front of a massive hotel, red carpet stretching to the entrance, cameras flashing even before they stepped out. "Ready?" Ethan asked, extending his hand. Sophie took it. His palm was warm, his grip steady. "Let's get this over with." The cameras exploded as they emerged. Ethan's arm settled around her waist, a gesture that looked affectionate but was clearly protective. He guided her through the gauntlet of photographers with practiced ease, smiling and nodding but never stopping. Inside the hotel's ballroom, the assault continued in a different form. People, wealthy, polished, intensely curious people, descended on them immediately. "Ethan, you got married and didn't tell anyone." "Who is she? Where did you meet?" "Sterling, you dog, you've been holding out on us." Ethan handled it with a smooth charm that Sophie found both impressive and slightly disturbing. He repeated their cover story with easy confidence, his hand never leaving her waist, his attention constantly checking on her. "This is my wife, Sophie," he said again and again. "We kept it quiet. You know how I am about privacy." Sophie smiled and nodded, and felt like a puppet in someone else's show. The real test came when a woman approached them, tall and elegant with perfect features and an expression of calculated interest. "Ethan," she purred, "married, I'm shocked. After our last conversation, I thought you desworn off commitment forever." "Isabel," Ethan's voice cooled noticeably. "This is Sophie. Sophie, this is Isabel Morrison. We used to know each other." The emphasis on "used to" was deliberate. So was Isabel's assessing gaze as she looked Sophie up and down. "Charming," Isabel said, her tone suggesting anything but, "Tell me, Sophie, what do you do?" "I'm a graphic designer," Sophie said, lifting her chin. She'd dealt with mean girls before, even if they hadn't been wearing $50,000 dresses. "How creative," Isabel smiled. "And you met Ethan through work, how convenient." "It was fortuitous," Sophie corrected smoothly. "I was hired to consult on a project. I didn't know who he was at first." "You didn't know Ethan Sterling?" Isabel's disbelief was palpable. "I don't follow society news," Sophie said honestly. I was too busy working 3 jobs to pay attention to billionaire gossip. A murmur went through the nearby crowd. Sophie had just admitted to being working class in a room full of inherited wealth. It was either the most disastrous or most brilliant move she could have made. Ethan's hand tightened on her waist. That's what I love about her, he said, his voice carrying across the curious onlookers. She's real, she doesn't care about any of this. He gestured vaguely at the opulent ballroom. She cares about good work and helping people, it's refreshing. The way he said it with such quiet conviction almost made Sophie believe he meant it. Isabel's smile tightened. How wonderfully authentic. Well, congratulations to you both. She drifted away, leaving Sophie feeling like she'd just survived a gladiatorial match. Sorry, Ethan murmured in her ear. Isabel is complicated. Ex-girlfriend. Ex-fiancé number 2, Ethan admitted. She's here with her new husband, I should have warned you. The evening stretched on. Sophie met dozens of people whose names and faces blurred together. She danced with Ethan, 3 formal dances that required his hand at her waist and their bodies pressed closer than they'd ever been. He was a good dancer, she noticed absently, confident without being showy. You're doing great, he said during the 3rd dance, his voice low. I know this is overwhelming. I feel like a circus animal, Sophie admitted. I know the feeling, Ethan said, surprising her. I've been performing in this circus my whole life. At least you get to leave after a year. There was such bitterness in his voice that Sophie looked up at him. In the chandelier light, his gray eyes looked almost silver, shadowed with something deeper than the immediate frustration. Did you want this? She asked impulsively. The empire, the money, she gestured vaguely at the surrounding wealth. I wanted to be a marine biologist, Ethan said, so quietly she almost missed it. I wanted to study coral reefs and ocean conservation. I got a degree in marine biology before my father died, and I had to come back to run Sterling Industries. The revelation hit Sophie like a wave. Here was the man behind the billionaire facade, someone who'd had dreams sacrificed on the altar of family obligation, just like her. I'm sorry, she said. Don't be, Ethan replied. I made my choices, we all do. The song ended. They stepped apart, the moment of vulnerability passing like a summer storm. As they prepared to leave, a photographer asked for a photo. Ethan pulled Sophie close, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, playing the part. The camera flashed, capturing an image of 2 strangers pretending to be in love, both trapped by circumstances neither had chosen. The gala photo appeared in society blogs by the next morning. Mysterious new Mrs. Sterling captivates at charity event. The articles speculated wildly about Sophie's background, how they'd met, why Ethan had kept the relationship secret. Sophie read them over coffee in her sitting room, feeling a mixture of unreality and dread. This was her life now, being analyzed and discussed by strangers. A knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Come in, she called, expecting Marcus. It was Ethan again. He was in running clothes, sweaty and slightly out of breath, his carefully controlled demeanor cracked by exercise. I saw the articles, he said without preamble. Are you okay? I'm being written about by gossip columnists who think they know my life story, Sophie said. How should I be? Angry, overwhelmed, ready to quit, Ethan suggested. All of the above, Sophie admitted, but I signed a contract, so here we are. Ethan crossed to the window, looking out at the gardens. I can make them stop. The photographers, the articles, I have lawyers who specialize in this. And then everyone would know we're hiding something, Sophie said. No, let them talk, it's just noise. Ethan turned to look at her, something like respect in his expression. You're tougher than I expected. I've survived worse than rich people gossiping about me, Sophie said dryly. Try being poor and having people judge your worth based on your zip code. I can't, Ethan said honestly. I was born into this. I've never known what it's like to worry about money. Must be nice, Sophie said, then immediately regretted the bitterness in her tone. Sorry, that wasn't fair. It was honest, Ethan corrected. And you're right, I have no idea what your life was like before this, but I'm trying to understand. Why? Sophie asked. We're business partners, not friends. You don't need to understand me. Maybe I want to, Ethan said quietly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to examine. I should shower, Ethan said abruptly. I just wanted to check on you. He left, and Sophie sat with the warm weight of his concern, a gift she hadn't expected and wasn't sure she wanted. Over the next weeks, a strange routine developed. They saw each other more often, brief conversations over coffee in the morning, dinners together a few times a week. Ethan would ask about her work, genuinely interested in her design projects. Sophie would ask about Sterling Industries, learning about corporate acquisitions and board meetings with a designer's attention to detail. They were becoming something she hadn't anticipated, acquaintances, maybe even the beginning of friends. Then Maya called. Sophie, I'm coming home from the hospital next week. Her sister's voice was bright with joy, slightly slurred from lingering brain damage but improving every day. The doctors say I can do my recovery at home. Isn't that amazing? That's wonderful, Sophie said, genuine happiness flooding through her. This was why she'd made the deal, this moment, this joy. Can you come stay with us? Maya asked. Just for a few days, I want to celebrate with you. Sophie's heart sank. I have work commitments, Maya. I can visit, but I can't stay. What work commitments? Her sister's confusion was evident. Sophie, you work from home. You can work anywhere. It's complicated, Sophie said weakly. You've been weird since the accident, Maya said, her voice suddenly sharp despite her injury. Mom says you're different. What's going on? Did something happen? Nothing happened, Sophie lied. I'm just busy. I'll visit this weekend, okay? She hung up feeling like the worst person alive. Her sister had nearly died, and Sophie couldn't even tell her the truth about why she couldn't come home. That evening, Ethan found her crying in the garden. Sophie, his voice was gentle. What's wrong? She told him. The whole story tumbled out, Maya's request, the lies she was maintaining, the crushing guilt of having a secret she couldn't share. Ethan listened without interrupting. When she finished, he sat beside her on the stone bench, careful to maintain space between them. Bring them here, he said. Sophie looked at him, shocked. What? Your sister, your mother, bring them here for a visit. Tell them you're house-sitting for a friend. Give them a tour. Let your sister recover in comfort. The house is big enough that I can stay in the guest house for a few days. You would do that? Sophie whispered. Your sister almost died, Sophie, Ethan said quietly. You saved her. The least I can do is give you a few days to be with your family without lying about why you can't come home. It was the kindest thing anyone had done for her in years. Thank you, Sophie said, her voice breaking. You're welcome, Ethan said. Then, with careful hesitation, he reached out and squeezed her hand. It was the first time they'd touched outside of their public performances. His hand was warm, calloused. He worked with his hands somehow, despite his wealth. The touch lasted only a moment, but it shifted something between them. They weren't just business partners anymore. They weren't friends yet either. They were something in between, undefined and cautiously hopeful. Maya and their mother came the following weekend. Sophie had prepared the lie carefully, a wealthy friend traveling abroad, house-sitting as a favor. Her mother was suspicious. What kind of friend has a house like this? But Maya was too delighted to care. Ethan, true to his word, had moved to the guest house. But on the second day, Sophie found him in the main kitchen early in the morning. I thought you were staying away, she said, pouring coffee. I forgot some files in my office, Ethan replied. Then he hesitated. How's your sister? Happy, Sophie said, her voice soft. She loves the gardens. She's been drawing them. She's always been artistic, but the injury affected her fine motor control. Watching her struggle to hold a pencil, she trailed off, emotion thick in her throat. She's improving, though, Ethan said gently. The doctors said the progress is remarkable. Because of you, Sophie said. Because you paid for the best surgeons the best care. She'd be dead if not for you. Don't, Ethan said sharply. Don't put me on a pedestal, Sophie. I didn't save her out of altruism. I saved her to trap you in this arrangement. And yet she's alive, Sophie said. Intentions don't change outcomes. Before Ethan could respond, Maya's voice rang out from the hallway. Sophie, where did you put O? She stopped in the kitchen doorway, staring at Ethan with wide eyes. Maya, this is... Ethan Sterling, Maya breathed. Then her eyes went sharp despite her injury. Wait, you're Ethan Sterling, the Ethan Sterling. She looked at Sophie. Why is Ethan Sterling in your friend's house? The lie died on Sophie's lips. She couldn't do it. Not to Maya, not about this. It's not a friend's house, Sophie admitted quietly. It's his house. And Maya, I'm married to him. The confession dropped like a bomb. Maya stared. You're what? We need to talk, Sophie said, all of us. They sat in Ethan's study, Sophie, Maya, Ethan, and Sophie's mother, who had been summoned with increasing panic. Sophie told them everything. The deal, the contract, the inheritance requirement, the year-long arrangement. Her mother cried. Maya looked devastated. You sold yourself to save me, Maya whispered. I chose to save you, Sophie corrected fiercely. There's a difference. How could you not tell us? Her mother demanded. Because you would have told me not to do it, Sophie said. And I would have done it anyway. Maya needed surgery. We had no money. This was the only option. There are always other options, her mother said. Name one, Sophie challenged. Name one option that would have paid for Maya's surgery, your medication, our debts, and still let us survive. One option I didn't already explore. Silence. Ethan spoke quietly. If you want to blame someone, blame me. I'm the one who made the offer. Sophie was just trying to save her family. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then, with the blunt honesty of 19-year-olds, she asked, Do you love my sister? Maya, Sophie gasped. It's a fair question, Ethan said. He met Maya's gaze directly. I barely know your sister. This is a business arrangement, but I respect her deeply. She's one of the strongest, most intelligent people I've ever met. That's not an answer, Maya said. It's the only honest one I have, Ethan replied. Sophie's mother studied him with a mother's sharp perception. My daughter is not merchandise, she said quietly. I don't care how much money you have. I know, Ethan said. If it helps, I'm trapped too. Different cage, same bars. It doesn't help, Sophie's mother said, but her expression softened slightly. But I appreciate your honesty. The rest of the visit was strained. Maya and their mother returned home earlier than planned, needing space to process. Maya hugged Sophie fiercely before leaving. I still think you're insane, Maya whispered, but thank you for saving my life. I'd do it again, Sophie said, 1,000 times over. After they left, Sophie found Ethan in his study, staring at paperwork without seeing it. I'm sorry, she said from the doorway. For what? For dragging you into my family drama. Ethan laughed a harsh sound. Sophie, you're trapped in my family drama. I think we're even. She stepped into the office, closing the door behind her. Maya asked if you loved me. I heard, Ethan said. You didn't answer. I answered honestly. He looked up at her. I don't know you well enough to love you, but I could. That's the terrifying part, I could. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and dangerous. That's not part of the contract, Sophie whispered. I know, Ethan said, which is why it can't happen. But the way he looked at her suggested it might already be too late. After Maya's visit, something changed. Ethan and Sophie stopped maintaining careful distance. They had dinner together every night, not as an obligation, but because they wanted to. They talked, really talked, about their lives, their fears, their dreams. Sophie learned that Ethan collected vintage maps of ocean currents, a remnant of his abandoned marine biology dreams. That he hated business dinners, but loved the actual work of running his companies. That he called his younger sister every Sunday, their only genuine family connection. Ethan learned that Sophie had wanted to be an artist, but chose design for its stability. That she'd paid for her father's funeral by selling her childhood home. That she read romance novels as escapism and felt guilty about it, as if wanting happy endings was naive. "It's not naive," Ethan said one evening over wine in the library. "It's hopeful. The world needs more hope." "Says the billionaire who arranged a marriage of convenience," Sophie teased gently. "Says the man who's starting to think it might be more than convenience," Ethan said quietly. Sophie's breath caught. "Ethan." "I know," he said quickly. "I know the rules, no emotional involvement. But Sophie, how am I supposed to live with you, talk with you, learn about you, and not care? You asked me to do something impossible." "You asked me first," Sophie countered. "You asked me to pretend to be your wife." "I'm not pretending anymore," Ethan said. The confession was an earthquake. Sophie set down her wine glass with trembling hands. "We can't do this." "Why not?" "Because in 8 months this ends. Because we both signed contracts saying this was temporary. Because you're scared," Ethan said gently. "I am too." "Of what?" "Of this being real," he admitted. "Of caring about you and then losing you. Of the year ending and going back to my empty life, except now I'll know what I'm missing." Sophie stood abruptly. "I need air." She fled to the gardens, her heart racing. This wasn't supposed to happen. They had rules, boundaries, clear terms. They were supposed to maintain emotional distance. But somewhere between morning coffees and evening conversations, between Maya's recovery and shared vulnerabilities, the distance had evaporated. Ethan found her by the fountain, her arms wrapped around herself in the cool night air. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have said anything." "No," Sophie said. "I'm glad you did, because I feel it too, and it's terrifying." "What do we do?" Ethan asked. "I don't know," Sophie admitted. "The contract." "Screw the contract," Ethan said. "The contract was about an inheritance and a business arrangement. This is about two people who are real, who care about each other." "For 8 more months," Sophie reminded him. "Then what?" "Then we decide," Ethan said. "Together, but Sophie, I'm not going to pretend I don't care about you anymore. I can't." Sophie turned to face him. In the moonlight, his gray eyes were silver, intense and honest. "If we do this," she said slowly, "if we let this be real, we could both get hurt." "I'm already hurting," Ethan said. "Pretending not to care is the hardest thing I've ever done." Sophie thought of all her reasons to maintain distance. The contract, the power imbalance, the temporary nature of their arrangement. All logical, all sensible. But logic hadn't saved Maya. A desperate, impossible deal with a stranger had. Maybe some things weren't meant to be logical. "Okay," she whispered, "let us be real." Ethan's smile was transformative, turning his serious face boyish with hope. "Yeah." "Yeah," Sophie confirmed. "But we take it slow. We still have separate rooms. We still maintain boundaries. We just stop pretending we're strangers." "I can do that," Ethan said. He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was tender, intimate in a way their public touches had never been. Sophie leaned into it, letting herself feel for the first time since this arrangement began. They stood in the garden, two people who'd started as a business transaction and were becoming something far more complicated and real. The change in their relationship was subtle but profound. They still maintained separate rooms, but now Ethan would knock on her door in the evening to watch movies together. They held hands during walks in the garden. They shared kisses, tentative at first, then deeper, filled with months of denied attraction. Sophie felt herself falling, and it was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. Then, 3 months before their contract ended, Marcus appeared at her door with a strange expression. "Mrs. Sterling, there's someone here to see you." In the drawing room sat a lawyer Sophie didn't recognize. Next to him was a woman in her 60s, elegant and severe. "Miss Chen," the woman said, "I'm Patricia Sterling, Ethan's grandmother." Sophie's blood ran cold. "I thought that I was dead, No, merely removed from Ethan's life by his grandfather's machinations. Patricia smiled thinly. I've been watching this arrangement with interest. What do you want? To offer you $5 million to leave, Patricia said bluntly. Right now, before you complete the contract year. Sophie felt the world tilt. Why? Because I want to see if you're a gold digger or if you actually care about my grandson, Patricia said. Take the money now, break his heart, but secure your future. Or stay and prove that you're here for more than the inheritance payout. It was a test, another test. Sophie looked at the lawyer's briefcase, undoubtedly full of legal documents and financial instruments. $5 million, more than she'd get from completing the contract. Her family would be secure for generations. She'd never have to worry again. All she had to do was walk away from Ethan. No, Sophie said quietly. No, Patricia's eyebrows rose. I'm not leaving, Sophie said. Not for money. If I leave, it'll be because Ethan and I decide together that it's best. But I'm not going to let you buy me off to prove some point about my character. Even though you could be sacrificing millions. Even then, Sophie confirmed. Because some things matter more than money, your grandson taught me that. Patricia Sterling studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled, a real smile, not the severe expression from before. Good, she said, you passed. Passed? My husband thought wealth corrupted everyone, Patricia explained. He set up that ridiculous inheritance test to prove all women were mercenary. I wanted to prove him wrong. She stood. I'll see you at Christmas dinner, Sophie. Welcome to the family, the real family. She left, leaving Sophie stunned. That evening, Sophie told Ethan everything. He was furious. At his grandmother, at the test, at the manipulation. I'm done with tests, he said. I'm done with contracts and arrangements and proving things to dead men. He took Sophie's hands. I love you, not because of any deal, not because of any timeline, because you're brilliant and strong and you chose to stay when you could have walked away. I love you too, Sophie said. The words felt like freedom. I think I have for months. So what do we do? Sophie smiled. We tear up the contract, we start over for real. No timelines, no requirements, just us. And the inheritance? Screw the inheritance, Sophie said. You can build your own fortune, or don't. But do it because you want to, not because some dead billionaire said you had to. Ethan laughed, the sound joyous and free. I like the way you think, Mrs. Sterling. I like it too, Sophie said. They kissed in the library, surrounded by books and possibility, two people who'd started as strangers in a transaction and become something neither had expected. Partners, equals, and genuinely, impossibly in love. 3 months later, on what would have been their contract's end date, they had a different ceremony. A real wedding with Sophie's family and Ethan's sister, with vows they wrote themselves and meant with their whole hearts. Maya was Sophie's maid of honor, fully recovered and beaming. I still think you're both insane, she whispered as Sophie walked down the aisle. Definitely, Sophie agreed, but sometimes the best things come from impossible choices. She reached Ethan at the altar. He smiled at her, gray eyes warm with love and promise. Ready to make this official? He asked. I thought we already were married, Sophie teased. That was business, Ethan said. This is real. And it was. The marriage that had begun as a desperate deal between strangers became the realest, truest thing in both their lives. Sometimes salvation comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the cages we enter to survive become homes. And sometimes, when you marry a stranger to save your family, you end up saving yourself.